Understand that this morning by reminding us that our role when folks come to faith in Christ is to teach them to observe all that God has commanded us. But this morning, we're going to really focus on the aspect of evangelism. And maybe before we begin, if you could think through right now, people in our own community, the region around our church, or your sphere of influence, your friends, family, neighbors, and let's get names in mind right now. For me, there's a couple kind of catty corner from us. Well, Dave and Barb Bandemir live one catty corner. The other catty corner, who I'm fairly certain are not believers. And God has, through a home project, given us all kinds of interaction with them that we hadn't had since we moved into the neighborhood. I'm burdened for them. Who are you burdened for in your sphere of influence? And let's try and have those people in mind as we work through this topic. So let's start with this question, and it goes to anybody, including Sharon. So, Steve, at the end of your sermon, you said, very, very in a very heart-filled way, that 50 years later, I understood the Great Commission then. I've seen the success of the Great Commission, where I am confident that I can say to somebody, if you trust in Christ, He will change your life. But then you, I think, very humbly said, there were some things that I would do differently. There, maybe were some mistakes we made early on. What mistakes have you made in personal evangelism that God had, because we all have, that God has helped you to see and that you're trying to grow and do things differently now?
You got a couple hours?
Sure. No.
I think there's a basic principle of just giving the message. The point is getting it across. And I think I had to understand the day where it was my burden for them to understand. Well, not their burden to try to understand what I'm trying to say. It's for me to help them understand what I'm trying to say. I think that took a little while to, and of course each one understands according to his background. So you're ministering to some that are from Muslim backgrounds, some are from Hindu backgrounds, some are from atheistic backgrounds, some have had bad experiences with Christians, and each one. So I think that I came to the point where I take time to understand the person, see what they are, what their thoughts are, what wrong thoughts they might have, just to be able to know how to communicate to them. And you find anybody's past life or anybody's past teaching influences the way he understands what he's exposed to. And when you bring the gospel and it's completely new, or there's a whole different presentation, it really throws them off. I think there's somewhere, I would say one of them is to understand that it's my burden to make it clear to them. Christ did leave glory, and He did become a man, and He lived like people so that He could talk to people. And I think somewhere I need to forget I'm a specialist and come down to where they are. And maybe that's one of them.
Rowena?
Something that Steve taught me, or he tried to teach me, is that in the States, we push people for decisions. We want decisions. We count numbers. It's a different thinking. And Steve would tell me, that person needs to come to that conviction on his own. Will sometimes see the fruit of a salvation choice in their life before they can really put words on it. And for me, that was very foreign. I worked as child evangelism as a teenager, and the wordless book was just a part of me. And I've had a hard time learning to he presents that gospel, but then he gives them time to think, time to choose, and you will see a change in their attitude and in their hunger for the word, hunger to be with Christians. The fruit that's more important than the words.
There can be times, as we are burdened for an unbelieving friend or neighbor or coworker, and we observe their life, and we see the fruits that they are bearing of the foolish decisions and choices that they are making. There might be times when we approach our evangelistic conversation along the lines of, if you would just accept Christ, everything would be so much better for you, right? Because at some level that is true, right? But at another level, our motivation for accepting Christ is not that everything would be okay during this life, right? And many times when God calls us into his family, he's calling us into persecution, and he's calling us into sideways relationships with those that we had been close to before. And sometimes it means departing from relationships that we were in. And many times that calling, accepting Christ can be actually entering into a very difficult life moving forward, but it's one that is good, and it's one that he wants. And so maybe, I guess, just the reminder is to temper and couch that conversation with, following Christ is not easy, but it is good and it is worth it. And it is better, but according to a different metric than how we measure good, in that sense. So. And that you had asked, mistakes you make.
Sure.
Definitely, as I was, in my internship, fresh out of Bible college and stuff, I think I would have tended towards that mindset of, burden for someone. And if, like prison ministry or something, and you're talking to these guys like, you just need to accept Christ, it'll be so much better. But yeah, in their context, maybe not in our human way of measuring that.
Go ahead, Steve.
I think a lot of times we'd like to have a method. Just tell me what verses to use and how in what order, and I just do this, and they get saved. It doesn't work. And you look at every time in the Gospels, every time Christ spoke to someone, he spoke in such a different way. It was just Nicodemus. He talked to him a certain way. The Samaritan woman, it was another way. He worked differently with the blind man that was born blind. It was according to each person. What was important, and it wasn't a matter of how long it took. It was a matter that it happened. Nicodemus understood, but he was a secret believer for a long time. We get some of those too, because especially when they're from Islam, they're not ready for the persecution. There's a time where they're showing interest, and they can have persecution because they're showing interest, but they're not a believer yet, so they don't have the Lord's strength to resist. But they're already being persecuted just because they're asking questions. And so sometimes you got to do things discreetly and work with them slowly. I think when you love the person, you want what's best for him, and you adjust because you love him. It's not just performing and I was sent to give a message, I'm going to spit it out, and the guy does whatever he wants, and that's his problem, what he does with it. If I have that kind of attitude, I might as well go home. It's someone that are trying to help.
So with that in mind, and Steve, you've emphasized that twice now, our Good Stuff article in the bulletin this week is on this very topic of cultivating gospel relationships and conversations. And if I could read just a paragraph or two here, it says, I met Musa at the neighborhood playground. He'd seen me running with my boys in a double stroller, so he came over to introduce himself. We don't see a lot of expats around here, he said. I wanted to say hello. The author says, we talked about his family, his work, and his neighborhood. Then the conversation turned. Tears filled his eyes as he described the rise of domestic abuse cases he'd seen, especially involving household helpers. Just the week before, he said, the police had been called to a neighboring flat. Musa, thanks for being so open, I replied. Then I asked, in a world like ours, full of pain and brokenness, where do you find hope? And Musa said, I like to think the best of people, only some people are truly bad. I paused and responded, there's a passage in the Bible that speaks to this about those who with authority should treat those under them. I'll be teaching on it in a few weeks. Oh, you're a pastor? Musa said. I am. And you're a Muslim? Not a good one, he said, but yes. Then I asked for his help. Since I'm new here, would you help me understand the culture of household helpers? And after I teach, can I send you my message? I'd love to hear what you think. He said he would, and we exchanged numbers before he had to go. We have twice now gone through as a church family a seminar on evangelism, and they teach that you are supposed to plant your flag early, that I'm a Christian, that you are to strategize and scheme. If you really want something in life, you anticipate, you pray, and you think about how I could move this forward, and then cultivate meaningful gospel conversations. The question to all of you is, how have you learned to do those things? Can you give us some concrete examples of ways that you've planted your flag and said, hey, I just want you to know I'm a Christian, or cultivated meaningful relationships, or schemed, maybe there's someone you're scheming for right now and how you would give the gospel to them. Steve is pointing at Rowena.
Well, you'll have to stop me because I thank God for my parents who were always witnessing. And I don't fit in France. You look at me, I'm very old-fashioned. It's not what you think of the French fashion. I never dyed my hair, and I'm in a place with skinny people on the Mediterranean Sea. I don't fit, but I have people that just are attracted to me. There's something about me. They trust me. I can have a clerk. I can have absolutely, I go out and I come back. There's something about me. And some of them say it's my truth. It's some I go gently. I don't know. It's a love that I have, and they feel it. And my neighbors, it's too long. I will try. Steve went down to Africa to teach pastors, and I was the first winter in our house, and behind all these walls. I said, Rowena, you've got to know your neighbors. What if you have a problem? You've got to know. So I did an American thing. I made cookies, and I made really kind of a pretty plate, and I could tell you how I do it afterwards. But anyway, I went around and I rang doorbells. We have about 15 neighbors behind walls in our area. And I called in, I said, I wanted to wish you a happy new year. I'm the new person that lives. And ever since then, that's 13 years ago, and I am loved. I could ask anything of anybody. They're scared of Steve because he's a pastor, but they're not scared of me. And I love it. So every Christmas for a while, I did something different, brownies or pumpkin bread or whatever. Anyway, I've kind of stopped it because now I'm at a different phase. I have different levels. But a year and a half ago, we had a church in Toledo, Ohio, who wanted to come help us at the church. And they said, what can we do? Well, we really didn't have ideas. We're not people that do well with teams. Anyway, they said we want to come, and we couldn't say no. That's where his parents were married, and they've been with us. They came, and the pastor who was bringing this team said, what can we do that's spiritual? They don't speak French. And I got the idea. I have so many ideas. I wear my husband out. But this was one he accepted. I said, let's have an American-French party in our yard. We have a big house. We're known. I know all these people from 11 years of January greetings and a track and a calendar. They know who we are. We were 53 in our yard, which is absolutely unheard of in southern France. There were neighbors that don't even speak to each other. There were neighbors who didn't even know each other. And that was because of some loving gesture that's not French. And they'd say, we'd never do that. I said, I know, my husband wouldn't either. But
Like good cop, bad
there's
cop.
just something, there's a verse in Proverbs. When I went to Afghanistan, when my grandson was born in Afghanistan, I went alone. I left after a month in Afghanistan. And I said, Stephen, I could make it here. There's a verse in Proverbs that says, the heart of man responds to the heart of man. And when you love Jesus Christ so much, and you care, and I write down names. I have lists all over my house. I told our church people, bury me with all my lists. But there's something personal that they know I care. So I really, 53, and some were there from 3 to 8 p.m. And it was an American party. The Americans from Toledo, Ohio, wanted to sing God Bless America. What do we do? Because Steve was the MC. Steve said, it's okay. And Steve he goes, he doesn't have my gifts, I don't have his. But he made it work. And I had my accordion, and we had a party. We had a very unusual witness in a very discreet way. And a French couple said to me, they said, a French couple from another church an hour away, they said, Rowena, we'll come and we'll bring our sound system. She writes music. You don't know me, but I'm really old fashioned, okay? So this Christian couple says, I can sing. So I said, bring your sound equipment. She came and she sang a gospel song she had composed. And while the neighbors were coming, there was this folk French songs going out. It was a beautiful mixture of American plus French, and so God just gives us different gifts.
Keith, do you dye your hair to reach the people in Uruguay? Rowena doesn't, so.
I was impressed. You play accordion?
Yes, but they're disappointed because I don't play anything but hymns. So they're a little bit disappointed in me. But yeah, I play the accordion.
Keith and Wendy, we read your prayer letters and we see your pictures. You are exemplary with the pictures that you include with your emails. But it seems like you're always with people. What steps do you take to build relationships where you can give the gospel? Just tell us what you do.
Well, our goal as we arrived in Uruguay was if it pleased the Lord to allow us to live nearish by our church plant so we could walk there, so we could build relationships in our neighborhood. If we needed to buy anything, if we needed to fix anything, if we needed some service or something done, our desire was to start in our neighborhood, just to have contact. It has been effective in the sense of outreach, but when you want to label it appliance breakdown evangelism, sometimes it's not real convenient, but it still is something that can be effective. So that's just one approach. We try to do our business where we live. Throughout the city, there are open-air markets. And so within a short radius of where our church is and where our home is, like there's a market that I go to on Tuesdays. There's another one I go to on Wednesdays, and there's another one close to the church I go to on Fridays. And it's mostly not just to buy our fruits and vegetables, but it's to have exposure to people who are out and about shopping that we would never really get to know going door to door. And so the people are there. And now after 30-some years in these same markets, people identify who I am and why I'm there. And some of these vendors, it's like, Keith, you haven't given me one of those little papers, for a month now. It's like they know why we're there, and they almost expect something. So there have been people that we've been able to connect with just because it's a way of life, just because it's where we go and what we do day by day. I will share one particular story, and that's when we grew out of an apartment about a block and a half from where we live. I mean, we prayed fervently. It was like, Lord, we want to be nearby. Wendy had some specifics. Lord, is there a house that we could have a big kitchen where we could entertain, where I can school our children, because we homeschool, a place that would have big windows. And I'm thinking more of man things, a place that we could grill meat, a place to park the car. I mean, and wouldn't you know, this place, block and a half, was there. It was built by people who were from Spain, so it did not have the Uruguayan dimensions of their house with a little kitchen in the back corner where a servant would have, worked on a daily basis. But this was a big, wide open kitchen, a place with big windows, a place where we could park our car, and eventually it even included a backyard, which is uncommon, I mean, just for Uruguayan standards. And our kids, we had that for them. It was like a refuge, a place that we could have people over. The day that the owner showed us the house and understood why we were there, and you folks have prayed for him. For 26 years we've lived in this house, renting it from Alberto and Estela. So Alberto tells me, Keith, you need to understand I'm an atheist. And that was day one. That was 1999. And since then, Alberto and Estela have been to evangelistic outreaches at our church. They've been in our home. They've had us in their home. He sees, just in our talking, Alberto, I'm going to buy a air conditioning unit for the main room of our church. Where would you recommend? You're going to buy one? Well, you buy one, I'll buy the other one. It's like, okay. So there has been progress over the years. Alberto comes to me and says, Keith, who would you have in your church that you could recommend to be my office manager? Actually it was first, who would you have that could do some work for me? And I recommended Pedro, who is now our church pastor. He wasn't pastor at the time. So Pedro began working for Alberto as a salesman. And short time went by, and Pedro says, I can't work for you anymore, Alberto. There's just too much that I feel like I'm compromising the truth in what you're selling or how you want it sold. So Alberto sees honesty, and he sees what he's getting, and he says, okay, would you be willing to be my office manager? And so he has been his office manager for over 15 years. And it's just neat to see light in Alberto's presence, because Alberto understands Christianity, but he will not embrace it yet. Part of the scheming and planning and cultivating, every month I take rent to Alberto, to his office. It's, 10-minute, 15-minute drive. And he says, Keith, I can just give you the account number to our bank, you can just transfer those funds. And I tell him, but Alberto, if I do that, I won't be able to see you every month. And he's fine with that. And he's especially fine with that because every month when I go to take rent, I usually take I take a treat, something that I've made, something that Wendy's made, and we share that with him. And then he says, you know what? If we divide our rent 4 ways every month, you know, you could come see me 4 times a month. And so every time I go, it's with the idea, how can I share Christ with him? And that's one of those things we would ask prayer, creative compassion. How do you keep explaining the gospel to someone who's heard it for 26 years, month after month? So I write up, usually about once a year, an evangelistic tract that we'll pass out in our neighborhood and just have on hand for contact with people in those open-air markets, with neighbors, of course. And there's one that I have, and it's called, have you thought about what happens after death? Now, that's not something I just lovingly, freely give to everybody I'm with, but I talked with Pedro one day. This was just about a year or so ago. Alberto had fallen from a ladder. He's 76. And I said, Pedro, because I had to go to the church to get something, I said, I'm praying about giving this flyer and talking to Alberto about this today. Would you please pray? So I get to the office, got my goodies, he's in his cast, and you could tell he was thoughtful. I go in his office, pay rent, and he's the one that brings up the subject of death. And I've got the flyer in my pocket. I said, you know what? I've been thinking and praying for you today. This is exactly what I would like to share with you. But Keith, you know I don't believe that. But Alberto, you know exactly that that's why I'm here. And it's just that kind of relationship. Again, he expects it, and yet he has not embraced it. I mean, so those are just some things. Always having something to share with people because we're with people every day. And then we come to the States, we could buy $300 worth of groceries, self-checkout, and not talk to anybody. But, the culture there, it's very social, very personal, very people-oriented. And I'll end with this last thought. But adapting to the culture where there's no compromise, I joke about our grilling. The way that the Uruguayans cook their meats is unusual compared to the States, and it is time consuming. I mean, you want to have a hamburger cookout, you plan for 2.5, 3 hours to get the burgers on the plate. It's just that's the way it's all done with wood, and the coals have to drop, and you put it under this grate, and the heat comes up, but it takes time. You're drinking your Uruguayan tea, mate, and you have people there, and it's not just a 10-minute gas grill thing and you're done. I mean, this is a way of socializing with the people, and you're rubbing shoulders and you're talking with them, and you're getting to know them. They're understanding why we're there and are amazed when they find out we weren't sent there and we aren't here for just 2 years, but it's for the long term. And so it's a lifetime process, but sometimes we are encouraged by the way that we see God has blessed, and sometimes we think, how could I have done that better? But that's more than a nutshell, but that's kind of our lives.
So Pastor Jason read some from the Good Stuff article. Going on from where he left off, the author talks about there are times when the conversation doesn't end with sharing the gospel, is that still a worthwhile conversation? So how would you think about that? That we have conversations that are maybe relationship building, but it doesn't end with sharing the gospel. How should we think about those things? What is that still a worthwhile conversation?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sad.
Yeah, I think sometimes maybe as we, are exposed to different evangelistic methods or, things like that, if we're not careful, we can start evaluating our evangelistic encounters as this checkbox, But God has called us into relationship with himself, and he's in this one that we are talking to, and it's not just a checkbox, it's a future person that could potentially have a relationship with God, and then God has called us into relationship with each other. So it's like it's a future person that might be able to come into the church and have a relationship with us in the church. And so a lot of times I will just play a game with myself where I'll look at what I'm doing from the perspective of someone on the outside, an unbeliever looking at me and saying, what are you doing? And maybe I judge the different cults and things this way as well, showing up at the door, knocking. What are my motivations? Do I have ulterior motives in trying to talk to this person about Christ? That would a person looking in at the outside go, you're being really weird. You have these little ulterior motives that you're just wanting to check these off and make yourself feel good and stuff. But if we can evaluate what is my motivation in reaching this person for Christ, and how does that happen? We're describing to them relationship with God through our relationship with them. And they're not just a fly-by-night encounter. So a lot of times we're wanting to serve them, showing the love of Christ to them, but genuinely interested in these individuals for building that trust and relationship that will one day allow us to be able to share the gospel. And increasingly more and more in our polarized culture, right, there is a huge gulf divide between where we are and where that person is in their spiritual journey, the questions they are asking. And I am firmly convinced that of the need for us to meet people where they are and bring them to where they need to be. And more that might just take a lot of time. And so you might not get to the gospel very fast, or if you do, it might shut down that relationship soon. Whereas, just like we're talking about, yes, they know you're a Christian, but then to understand that even though you're a Christian, you actually really do genuinely care about them on human levels, things that are important to them, and then just pray that God will open the possibility of being able to share Christ with that person as well.
Maybe taking a step back up the chain, what are some things that you do to make sure that your own heart is in the right place and you have something to give out when you have these conversations? I especially think about this when I read letters from each of you that talk about the sheer number of people that are vying for your time or that you're trying to invest in. So how do you make sure that you have that vibrancy, that warmth, that spirit filling in your heart, so that you are ready to interact with all of these people?
I would say that that's a very good question. There was a time where I felt like the contacts I was receiving, the people that are coming, were actually sent of the devil to take up my time, to keep me from working anywhere else. And at that time I started praying and said, Lord, give me discernment to see if it's somebody that really cares, or is just somebody that the enemy is using to tie me up. And then there's also, you need wisdom, because friendship takes time. and you only have 24 hours a day, and you have too many friendships. It takes up your whole day. So you got to find the wisdom, the balance between the friendship and also, I mean, we're here for a job too, and and at the same time, and I agree with Keith was talking about you know, you can come across like, well, he's trying to sell me something, and if I'm a customer, well, he's got some time for me. If I'm not a customer, get out of here. I'm not interested. And then you talk about loving them and everything else. You know, no, he's got personal interests, and his pay is dependent on how many people he recruits, and they get all these ideas. So it's really got to work at being genuine, and at the same time discerning and wisdom. And then you got the people, when you're working with people, they're thinking, you're American, well, how could you get me to somewhere, and how can you help me? And they've got their own interests too. And so it does, you need discernment. And at the same time, I'm always amazed at the answers the Lord had. Sometimes they come and send him questions, and he had just a short answer, and that took care of it. And I say, Lord, that would save a lot of time if I could be smart enough or wise enough to be able to have just an answer that took care of it. And but you find those in the Word as you read the Word, and there's times I say, oh Lord, that answer that you gave me, that, thank you. And afterwards I say, thank you, gave me for that answer. That really, it's not the fact that it stopped him; it's the fact that it's something that provoked thinking in his mind. It may not be the direct answer to his question, but it's what he needs.
That's what Steve is good at. He doesn't talk long, but he gives something to think about, and so and then when some have gotten saved, they said that was the question you gave that just kept working, kept repeating in their minds. I personally, I pray. I try to have tracts or different kinds of things in my purse, but it's not always been in our ministry like that. But now when there's something that just really impresses itself on my mind, or it's strong in me. And when the worst is if my knees start trembling, I know I've got to do it. I've got to do it. And we have a couple. It's odd. We have a couple. He's a healer, and in France, in southern France, the people there's healers for fire, burns, and that the local hospitals actually call these people. It's completely the occult. It's completely in the occult. And the son of this couple started coming. And he said, my parents will kill me if they know I've come to church today. And as quickly, this couple, they like us. And the wife, I said, I'm never going to go there alone. Well, it turned out we went during COVID. A neighbor ran into our car. It was just completely strange. But that lady, that we went to see this couple before we came on furlough. I said to Steve when we left, because the man, I cannot talk, I've been in France 50 years, and I can't understand this healer's French. He is so provincial. He's really the local. And his wife, she's very obese. She is very, very big. This was the first visit we've been in their home. We don't stay real long, but I talk of Jesus. Jesus is the only person I have to talk about. And this last visit, I left and I said, this is the first time we've been in their house that she didn't have an answer for me. And I said to her, you're being pulled apart with what you believe with Satan and and she's listening to Steve's messages. And she has the demon in her telling her husband, the healer, what to do. So this is deep stuff, but Jesus is the solution. But when I start really feeling it building up in me, I do try to listen now, and but we work very differently. Steve talks in very few words, I was going to add a little bit. Our biggest burden right now is not doing it ourselves. We're getting old, if you hadn't noticed. But our church people have been saved, and they need to know how to talk to their relatives, how to be kind. They need to know. I have people calling me to know how to reach their family, or I'll have grandmas wanting their children to come to my Sunday school class, and those little 3-year-olds will go home and say, "Daddy, we need to pray before we eat." I mean, so it's not us doing it. It's getting our people to believe it's possible. And they look at me and, well, if it works for Rowena, maybe I can do it too. And so that's really where we're really trying. And Steve's he doesn't have a first-time contact with people like I do, but he is excellent for being wise in helping our people know how to stay normal and include Jesus Christ.
For me, I think what makes a big difference is just my view of people. If I'm looking at evangelism as just something that I have to do as a missionary or something, it's not the same as when I look at a person and I see a human being who, like, without Christ, I would be there, right? And see them in love and pursue them, not necessarily always that, like, okay, I gotta lead this person to Christ, but this is someone that I need to love. And if Christ would use me to lead them to him, then I'm very grateful for that. But I'm going to love them whether they come to Christ or not. And that kind of takes the burden, I guess, off of me of, I don't know, for those of us who've had kids, you realize there is no amount of explaining the gospel that is going to bring that person to Christ. There's no possible way I can convince that person and lead them to Christ. Christ has to do that. But I can love them, and every opportunity that Christ gives me to share truth with them, I take that and I allow God to do the work in that life. And so in a scenario of you have an interaction with a person, you didn't quite get to the gospel, there's an aspect of, if I love them in a Christ-like manner, then that was successful. I count that as, that counted. Yep. Yeah. And if I don't think we always have to get to the gospel every time, but we do need to love others how God has called us to love others.
Would you pray with me? Father, after this discussion, Steve's words halfway through his sermon make so much more sense, that we just need to do it. We need to meet people, love them, and when the opportunity arises or when our knees begin shaking, we need to give them the gospel and tell them about Christ. Lord, thank you for these friends and their willingness to share from their experience, their successes, and even things that they would do differently. Oh, Lord, I pray that you'd help us as a church family to not only be hearers of your word, but doers of it for sake of your name. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.